Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 21st of October 2015. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're going to be joined by live video linked by Mark Anderson from American Free Press. But as always, a few comments on the weather. Not looking so good at the moment. We've got rain in southeast London, overcast in Pembrokeshire, and just a bit grey in Plymouth. Well, let's ask Mark, what is the weather doing in your location?
Oh, just a crisp autumn day here in Michigan, partly cloudy, and not as cloudy as what comes out of Washington, though.
Okay, and of course we're in the fall, as it's known in the colonies, so what are the leaves looking like today?
It's definitely the fall colors in all their glory. So that's a positive note in an otherwise troubled world.
Okay, lovely. Well, Mike, I think you're kicking off with an advert.
Well, just want to remind everybody, this taking place at the London School of Economics tonight. Anybody that would be able to go along to that, it is a public meeting. Please do, would be very interested to get some feedback on it. Also, just a reminder that tonight is the UK Column monthly meeting at the George as usual. Hope to see as many people as possible there.
Excellent. Well, perhaps the Chinese president will be there, Mike.
I don't think so, but certainly he was in Parliament yesterday, and he was giving his speech in front of the MPs and British Parliament. He said, as the mother of all parliaments, and Britain was the first to establish representative government, and he said that in China, however, putting people first and following the rule of law, these were established 4,000 years ago under Yu the Great. So that's good. And he said that, of course, Britain was the first to recognize the new China following the revolution in 1949, and the first European country, the first Western nation to join the Asian Infrastructure Bank. Quoting Shakespeare, he said, what is past is prologue, and we're now in the age of pursuing peace and development. So that all sounds very good. Now, on the face of it, it seems that we're really working hard to woo China and Chinese money here in Britain. We're giving them special tourist visas. We're not mentioning human rights, and actually we would be pretty hypocritical to do so in any case. And apparently, according to this translation of an article in the People's Daily, I think it was, that we are also, at least Osborne, showing humility. We're also selling everything off to them. Property in London, nuclear power, everything is being sold to them now. Of course, government policy in this country is to privatise everything, sell state assets for a song. So it might as well be the Chinese, since this fits in with the overall political strategy in this country. But this sums up Britain's attitude to China, I think. This is Cameron. This is the look he had on his face when President Xi had finished speaking yesterday, and I don't think I see too much humility there. I don't see too much welcome there either. And in fact, I think here is the arrogance of someone with a cunning plan. I think the media in general has it wrong. We're not getting into bed with China for some hot, passionate coupling. We do intend to screw them, though. We are wooing China, in fact, because China is a threat to the City of London with its BRICS program. It's a threat to the World Bank and the IMF. Britain's policy has always been to destroy from the inside. Britain is expert at identifying factions and fomenting tensions, and Britain was the first Western power to join the AIIB. I think that's because we intend to destroy it from the inside.
The look on Cameron's face, quite remarkable. I've kept looking at that particular expression. There's a sort of cunning deviousness and satisfaction.
Yes.
And as you pointed out, Mike, he hasn't got his translation earphones on or anywhere near him. He didn't appear to have any paperwork of a speech perhaps on his lap. So how did he participate in this? Or is he fluent in Chinese?
He must be fluent in Chinese. He must be.
Yeah, right, interesting. Well, of course, the happy couple sat together there, Mr. Corbyn and David Cameron. We're going to mention a little bit later in today's news.
Yes. In the meantime, of course, what have we got? Trident Juncture, Operation Trident Juncture kicked off a couple of days ago. And unsurprisingly, the evil Russian threat is on the agenda, followed in second place by ISIS. So we've got 36,000 soldiers, sailors, and airmen from 30 countries, including a number of, well, I think Ukraine is even involved, a number of non-NATO allies. Australia is there as well. And this is NATO Deputy Secretary General Alexander Vershbow. And he said that this exercise will demonstrate that NATO can deal with everything from conventional military engagements to more subtle hybrid warfare techniques and propaganda. I think they're starting that with their news coverage. He said, in this new world, NATO's allies and partners must be able to move quickly and act decisively. And he said that while the fictitious aggressor in their war games here, it was not supposed to be Russia. He did say that's not to say that some of the challenges we're addressing and testing for are not analogous to the challenges we would face if we were to have a conflict with Russia. So that's good.
Can I just add to that, Mike, that if there's 36 NATO countries participating in an exercise, it's going to be a shambles, because I'm going to say from experience way back, the moment you've got a few countries operating together, national languages, national procedures, it's going to be a shambles. But there'll be a publicity, upfront publicity statement that everything's gone brilliantly.
Well, it's interesting.
Sorry to be cynical.
It's interesting you say that, because NATO's message to Russia absolutely is that if you attack one of us, you attack us all, and we'll all attack you back. So what you're implying is that such an attack would fail?
Well,
even if we had the resources to do it?
I think we could have an interesting discussion about the performance of NATO, but there we are.
But in the meantime, the US Navy is seeming to claim that they have successfully intercepted a missile during their war games. They're saying that it tested anti-missile defense systems during the Trident Juncture exercise in Europe, when anti-ship cruise missiles fired from the Scottish coast were shot down by a pair of guided interceptors with the help of tracking from Allied ships. And this was the first time, apparently, a Standard Missile 3, which is a Mach 10 missile, was shot down in this way. But you don't believe it?
I'm afraid I don't know. There's just something about the timing of this. It pops up after we're clearly seeing US and NATO shuddering at the Russian performance in Syria. And of course, we've had the Russian military unveiling some phenomenal military capability. We've got American generals stating in the paper that they've been caught totally off guard by Russian performance. I was quite astounded at what I can't remember the general's name, but it was in the press over the last couple of days, and he said we did not have the intelligence coming in. We don't have the Russian speakers. We have been caught off guard, and now a few days later, well, there's no problem because we've shut it down. Do not believe it.
Have you any thoughts on this, Mark, before we move on?
Well, nothing in depth except to say that it would be not unlike the U.S. Navy to trump up some capabilities that either it doesn't have or it has in an only touch and go kind of fashion. A lot of this is just flexing muscle, and you really don't know what's real and what's not. Brian is right to have some doubts about this.
I mean, what's the public perception of what Putin has done in Syria, then?
It's a very mixed bag. If people are believing the news media, they think Putin is a villain or a would-be villain. If they're, in tandem or in line with the government thinking, if they think outside the box a little bit, Putin is either regarded as a mystery or something of a unlikely hero or improbable hero, in that he's calling out the U.S. and saying, ISIS is not difficult to knock out. After all, you're backing them, so you're protecting them. We can send our Russian planes in and knock out ISIS in a New York minute, no problem. So, it's slowly leaking in or seeping into the consciousness here that Putin is not altogether bad, but you have this, sizable part of the population that still wants to believe the government party line.
Yeah, well, we'll come on to that a bit more in a moment, I'm sure. Right, now, I think this is one of those opportunities that we get to say, I told you so, because the Daily Express front page this morning, new call to slash pension payouts. Millions face threat to retirement income after calls to slash payouts. An authoritative think tank report call for the abolition of the so-called triple lock, which guarantees pension rises. The lock means state pensions go up by either inflation, earnings growth, or 2.5%, whichever is the highest. But it's costing taxpayers £6 billion a year and needs to end, said the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Now, I've been warning about this for several years, I think, and I'm not going to show it again today, but let's remember that state and public pensions in this country are a Ponzi scheme. The black hole, because taxpayers pay pensions as we go, the black hole of money owed for current liabilities is around £5 trillion. And that is simply unpayable. So as this article suggests, they're expecting pension age to rise to 69 by the 2040s. I probably expect that to start going up sooner than that. But already we're seeing calls to reduce the amount of money paid out in the state pension. But it's not just the state pension that is in trouble, because as Investment Research Dynamics website here reports, the IMF fears underfunded pension funds, this is private pension funds, could be encouraged to chase returns through riskier investments such as such as direct credit exposure, or by engaging in securities lending in order to improve their funding ratios. And basically what they're saying is that pension funds, private pension funds, never mind the public and state pension funds, are collectively insolvent, and basically asset managers running these funds have refused to fund them properly. They expect a certain percentage annual return, but that isn't going to happen. They're basically bankrupt. And, this is something we've been saying for a long time, that pensions are not going to pay out in the not very distant future.
Yeah, before we bring Mark back in, Mike, I just wanted to say that we had some very interesting information come into the office the other day, and that is the Department for Work and Pensions has now been paying out thousands of pounds for leadership training of its top executives. And what's interesting about this is they're using specialists to train DWP people, not in sorting out pension crisis, but becoming leaders. And the specialists they're using are connected to the Windsor Leadership Trust, which of course is a very common purpose-like organisation for the great and the good. So if we're wondering why we've got a situation where people are saying they're going into job centres, they're having benefits cut, and there's a sort of vicious arrogance as this is being done, perhaps the answer is because we've now got leadership training coming into the DWP. We will show you the evidence for that over the coming days.
Okay, Mark, American Free Press here reporting, in fact, you reporting that people demanding bank reforms. This is another grassroots rally. What's happening here?
This was recent, right around the time that the Pope was in Washington, and I went to Reading, Pennsylvania, a rather depressed town economically for sure. And Mickey Paletta of Americans for Banking Reform, the former Citizens Reform Center there in eastern Pennsylvania, helped sponsor this rally. There were, several hundred people there, and the idea of it was to protest the basic fraud and corruption inherent in the way banks operate, and to point out that the protesters feel that the courts are complicit in this corruption.
Well, that's an interesting point, because our guest yesterday, Guy Taylor, was making exactly that point, that the courts, in fact, the courts have to be complicit in this, don't they? Because as soon as they make a judgment against the financial system, the whole house of cards is going to come down.
That's correct. It's very, very fragile for them, very vulnerable. And this kind of agitation that I covered there in Pennsylvania targets that vulnerability to expose what happened when a bank makes a loan. Just to give you a quick taste of it, when a bank makes a loan, they don't loan their own money or their own profits, and they don't loan their depositors money either. They create the money through data entry out of thin air, but that's not so much the problem as that they attach interest to it, and in most loans, collateral, meaning they have a claim or a lien on your land, but they take no financial risk when they make that lien or collateral on your land or property. So the fraud is very evident. And what these protesters and the leaders of the protest are pointing out is that the more knowledge and awareness and agitation there is, the more that the fraud will be exposed, and then the banking system will be exposed for all to see, and then maybe some changes could happen.
And is this type of action something which is happening across the country?
Sporadically, yeah. I mean, certainly there could be more, but lately, especially when you have all this activity, especially what's happened in Iceland over the last few years, the parliament wanting to make the monetary system a little bit more citizen friendly, some bankers going to jail. You've got things like the Swiss basic income vote that's probably going to be on the ballot. You've got a variety of things, scrip and local currencies taking root in the United States and Canada. There's just a lot of percolating from the bottom up, not the top down, to get a more free flowing liquidity in the economy and free it up so people can function and not always have to borrow money as debt, and to move forward in their lives.
Now, you were in Canada recently, is that correct?
Yes.
So what was going on?
That's known as the annual, or maybe there's two a year, but at least one a year of the Social Credit Conference. And what that is a particular kind of monetary reform that I've been studying for a few years. And there's a group up there, the Michael Journal, michaeljournal.org, I believe it is, that is among others that have looked at this particular reform that actually started in the British Isles by the picture you're showing there, the Scottish engineer C.H. Douglas, who worked for the British government on a number of engineering projects, I believe in India included. And throughout the Dominions, Canada, New Zealand, and whatnot, Australia, this was a hot topic in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. After World War II, though, it kind of got shattered by the creation of the World Bank and the IMF at the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire in 1944, and that pushed this kind of idea kind of to the margins. But social credit, among other ideas, are making something of a comeback because of what I'm talking about. All these different concepts trying to challenge the banking system and the courts.
So at this point, do you think there's any one movement which is sort of making progress over any of the others, or is it all very factional at the moment?
Right now, the hard facts are it's factional. From my own studies, I believe social credit has the most long-term applicability in that it solves a lot of problems that the others don't. However, it might take a little longer to understand or roll out or organize, but it's the one that has a lot of history behind it, based in the British Isles and the Dominions. And it offers a lot of remedies for many of the problems, even the pension problem you mentioned, although I'm still studying a lot of the details. But it's important that we look at everything, even things that might seem a little counterintuitive at first, because the banking fraud runs very deep, hundreds of years, including the Bank of England's formation in 1694. But even before that, it goes back to Babylon, thousands of years, really. And so the way banking defrauds us is a very carefully calculated machine with a very, very deep history, and it takes a lot to dislodge it.
It does. It is amusing, I think, or ironic that the same type of tactics that are used today have been used hundreds and thousands of years ago, and you would think that the rest of us would have learned by now.
Yeah, it's tough. Well, we've got the mother of all battles, really. We look at the governments, we look at their war policies, their foreign policies, but behind it all is the banking octopus, I guess you'd say. And it's the mother of all battles. It's an ideological battle of epic proportions, but people are trying to break it down into small pieces, like Major Douglas did with social credit. There was the social credit movement in the States by Gorham Munson of Wesleyan University. There's been others. There's the current American Monetary Institute with Stephen Zarlenga. There's the Bradbury Pound. But all of these point towards a lot of similar goals, and that is to make money not an instrument of debt, but to create money interest-free and debt-free, because you'll never get out of debt as long as money is created as debt.
Indeed. Brian, do hedgehogs carry much debt?
Well, I'm just going to say that what have we covered so far? We've talked about what's happening with China. That could lead us into human rights issues. We've got the selling off of the British infrastructure, the Chinese. We're talking about NATO troubles. We've got monetary troubles. We've got pensions. This is local Conservative MP Oliver Colville. He's got a bit of a thing about hedgehogs. So we're just going to say, never mind all the things happening, the NHS, the collapse of the armed forces, child abuse, banking, destruction of the police, poverty, failure of justice, mediatisation and EU treason. This man has got a fixation on hedgehogs. Now, I'm pretty sympathetic to hedgehogs because I think they get a raw deal, particularly on the lack of road crossings provided for them. But this man is ignoring the real world, and it's like he's gone into a bunker.
Is it a fetish?
It could be, but I think we've had people going to the Conservative conference and saying that basically it was as though the Conservative MPs were divorced from reality. They were in the bunker. There was cognitive dissonance. This man seems to, perhaps it is a fetish, but he's there on the subject of hedgehogs. Well, I'm pleased to say that, as always, UK Column was able to get a reporter a little bit closer to a discussion that took place not only with Oliver Colville, but as you can see, David Cameron was present. Now, we weren't able to catch all of the conversation, but we thought we heard Oliver Colville say, I don't care what this man says about hedgehogs, they're bigger than that. And of course, David Cameron replied, my goodness, hogs, now we're talking, takes me back to my student initiation. So pigs and hedgehogs are very big in UK at the moment, Mark. I don't know whether you're aware of the unfortunate allegations that our Prime Minister put how are we allowed to describe this, his reproductive equipment in a pig's mouth. But luckily the pig was dead, apparently. But we've got to carry this Prime Minister as he mixes with a man who's very keen on hedgehogs. It's worrying. No wonder Putin's worried about forming foreign policy against these sorts of countries. Can you comment at all? Maybe not.
That one almost defies parody and comment, except to say that if this is some sort of mild hint, maybe not so mild, towards some sort of perversion or unhealthy fetish, I can only say that political power inevitably leads to that, like the Hellfire Clubs of yore and others that indulged in debaucheries, or at least flirted with the idea, because the end of power, or the end of total power, is insanity, I believe.
Yeah. Well, we're rapidly approaching that in UK, we think, and getting the public to understand that is the aim of our own government is a key part of what we're trying to do. So over to you in farming, or it looks like it from this slide. What are they up to here?
It's actually feudalism, Brian. Right? Feudalism, now we've got to say that feudalism does not, as the word might suggest, require a society of kings and noblemen with peasants living in mud huts any more than to be a fascist requires the wearing of a swastika. But instead, a feudal society is one, we might describe it as one where 95% of the population is treated like ill-fed, poorly educated pigs, where there is no hope of a better life for the next generation, and where the top 5% live as an oligarchy, feeding off the rest via their corporations, supported by their unelected puppet masters such as think tanks and NGOs, and they manage the so-called elected representatives. Now, going back a few years, one of the key authors of the Lisbon Treaty was this man, Giuliano Amato. He was president of Italy at one point. And in an interview with Barbara Spinelli, which was printed in the Italian daily newspaper La Stampa on the 13th of July 2000, Amato explained his vision of the future. He said, frankly, I do not want a continental Europe only, without the immense patrimony of England and of the Scandinavians linked to England, nor would I like to lose Spain, which is sceptical of the vanguard. To have England among us would not be bad. In many ways, London is already where we would like it to be. It would not be bad if England, with its experience of economic reforms, were present in the Council of States belonging to the Euro. Therefore, I prefer to go slowly, to crumble little by little pieces of sovereignty, avoiding sudden shifts from national to federal powers. I do not believe in a federal sovereign because our globalized universe is post-Hobbesian. And Spinelli said, the world you describe seems to be pre-Hobbesian. It seems to precede the nation state. And he said, well, why not go back to the pre-Hobbes? Why not go back to the period before Hobbes? He said, the Middle Ages had a much richer humanity, a diversity of identity which today can be a model. The Middle Ages is beautiful. It can have its policy-making centres without relying entirely on anyone. It's beyond the bounds of the nation state. Today, as then, nomads are reappearing in our societies. Today also we have powers without territories. Without sovereignties, we will not have totalitarianism. He said, democracy does not need a sovereign. So behind the idea of the Lisbon Treaty, and he must have agreed with it, is first a return to a Middle Ages style feudalism, characterized for the vast majority with an absence of human rights, justice, short life expectancies, rampaging war and disease. This was the Middle Ages in many cases. And to consider that beautiful perhaps might be described as insane. Now, another characteristic of the Middle Ages was the city-state, and this is the second front in the destruction of the nation-state. All the while we're fretting over Scottish independence and so on. In the meantime, they're pushing this agenda of the city-state. Now, the modern drive to re-establish the city-state began in April 2006 with the first transatlantic conference of mayors held in Lyon in France. Opening the conference, Denver Mayor at the time, Wellington E. Webb, said, if there is one theme I'd like to impact during this session, it is the 19th century was the century of empires, the 20th century was the century of nation states, and the 21st century will be a century of cities. So just as the Lisbon Treaty moved power from sovereign nation governments to an unelected dictatorship, the city-state takes power via devolution. In combination, we leave the nation with no power of self-determination, because in the end, the city-state will only exist to implement the policies handed down by the unelected dictatorship through think tanks and NGOs. The policy architecture represents the goal of a centrally managed global fascist dictatorship. The key elements are being put in place slowly but surely. So as the Cities and Local Government Devolution Bill 2015 reaches the committee stage today, I would suggest we all ask ourselves, who is driving this policy of devolution in city-states and what's their motivation? Is David Cameron being honest and truthful when he implies that it was his big idea? I don't think so.
I don't think he's capable of telling the truth, actually, Mike.
Indeed.
That's it.
Well, Mark, what's going on in the States at the moment? John Boehner, what's his name? He doesn't seem to be in such a happy place at the moment, the Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Well, yeah, I don't know that he's unhappy. He's certainly a little insecure. The untold story is House Resolution 385. Before all this talk of Boehner stepping down as Speaker of the House, he's an Ohio Republican, and he's very much an establishment Republican, meaning pro-war, pro-banks, pro-corporation. And before all this talk that the Pope came here and maybe Boehner had a change of conscience and he's going to decide to step down as Speaker, there was a bill by the backbenchers, House Resolution 385, like mentioned, that declared the Speaker of the House seat vacant. But what they meant was it's a bill of no confidence in Boehner himself. And Mark Meadows, a North Carolina Republican, and Justin Amash, another backbencher out here in Michigan, a Republican, they put forth this bill, among others, basically saying John Boehner is blocking everything we do. We backbenchers in British vernacular have no chance to be heard. He's only working for the establishment, pro-war, pro-corporation Republicans. So Boehner was really having a big fracture within his own party that preceded all this other talk about him stepping down. That's the story behind the scenes. There's basically a revolt within the GOP, to put it simply. And so fast forward, now we've got 8 people, 7 or 8, last count, 8 people wanting to be Speaker. And it's up for grabs. Boehner is in there at least until the end of this month. And so he still hasn't stepped down. And, by the time October winds up, he might go, being Speaker isn't so bad. After all, you never know. So we'll see if the revolt within the GOP and Boehner's announced plans actually come to fruition and one of these 8 candidates gets in there. And some of the candidates that want to be in there are more backbencher types, more rebel Republicans, but many are more establishmentarians that would do basically the same thing as Boehner.
So for the British audience, because we don't really necessarily know how Congress works entirely, but in the UK in Parliament, the Speaker has a role as chairman, effectively, of the debates, and he's there to maintain the rules of the debates and of Parliament. Does the Speaker in the House of Representatives have a greater role in that?
Yeah, he does. He has a very similar role, and of course, he's third in line. If the president were to become killed or incapacitated, and the vice president killed or incapacitated, then the Speaker of the House becomes President of the United States under the Constitution.
So in that case, you could actually end up with a president who was of an unelected party, even.
Yeah, you would have an appointed president if the president and vice president were killed or incapacitated. Then the Speaker would be president. Unelected. It would just be a succession kind of thing in case of an emergency or something like that. But yeah, he makes up the rules. The Speaker has a lot of clout over who gets very choice committee positions, chairmanships of committees and subcommittees. So the whole mechanism in the House of Representatives falls on the Speaker. And if he's against a certain faction within his own party, he can keep that faction subdued, so they can't put forth anti-war bills, so they can't put forth bills to close down some of our military bases in the United States empire, or anything that they would find objectionable. So that's how the establishment GOP keeps the lid on things for the big lobbyists and the big bankers and the big corporations, right, through a speaker like Boehner, a yes man.
Okay. Now, the other area that you wanted to cover, Mark, was Donald Trump, and we've got two articles here. One from American Free Press asking, is Trump a populist or a pro-Zionist spoiler? And the other one from Rush Limbaugh saying why Trump is clobbering establishment GOP. What's your take on what this man's doing at the moment?
Well, Donald Trump is all over the place. He's winning a lot of hearts and minds, and he's certainly a flamboyant and colorful character. And he's no dummy, and he's got plenty of his own money, so we can admit that he can move forward without much, if any, PAC money, certainly, and he can't really be bought off in the traditional sense of buying someone off. On the first article posted on the AFP website, pro-Zionist shill or populist, it's a mixed bag. For instance, he went over to Israel, and Trump was used on a TV commercial to promote the re-election of Benjamin Netanyahu. And Trump did this, of course, voluntarily. I point that out just matter-of-factly in the article that people need to know this. And he went to a Birch Run, Michigan. This is a community in Michigan, Birch Run. And Trump spoke for about an hour there to a Lincoln Day dinner, an annual Republican event. And he talked about the importance of the friendship of the U.S. with Israel. But I do mention toward the end of the article that Trump, being a very shrewd dealer, may in fact be pro-Israel, and people can make their choice for president whether they like him or not based on that issue. But that Trump also has a way of collecting bargaining chips. In other words, he does Netanyahu a favor by speaking for one of his campaign re-election commercials. And then Netanyahu owes Donald one. He owes him a favor if Donald were to become president. This is the way Trump operates. But nevertheless, if people are concerned about the aggression of the Israeli state and Netanyahu in particular, they might take offense or look at this very jaundiced that he helped someone like Netanyahu in such a personal way, to help him get reelected. But Trump also knows the Clintons quite well, and I reason in this article that if Trump were to lose traction or take a big dive in the polls, he's basically sucking the oxygen out of the rest of the GOP rivals, and that would leave Hillary Clinton in the catbird seat where she could win by default. And he is good friends with the Clintons, Trump is, and he's been friends with them a long time. There's old news clips where he's praising Bill and Hillary Clinton, even though Bill and Hill are comparable to Bonnie and Clyde, only with official duties. Yeah. Trump is a very mixed bag. And he, to move on to the other thing, with the 9/11 issue that he just raised and the Rush Limbaugh piece, Rush Limbaugh, of course, is the well-known GOP radio host, pro-Republican radio host. He's been popular in the United States for about 15 or 20 years. And Limbaugh is pointing out that, and this is something for Limbaugh to say this, Limbaugh would not normally endorse a gadfly to this extent, but Limbaugh is saying, love Trump or hate him, he's really clobbering the rest of the GOP. And Limbaugh even went so far as to say that Trump criticizing Jeb Bush because Jeb Bush's brother allowed 9/11 to happen. Limbaugh's even saying that's fair play, even though most commentators and pundits are crying foul and saying Trump is being unfair, picking on Jeb Bush because his brother let 9/11 happen. But what's important is it brings the 9/11 issue back into the discussion. And I think that's important. The Bush family is a dynasty, just like the Clintons are to an extent. And Limbaugh is saying we don't need another Bush. We don't need another Clinton. We may not like Trump all the way across, but at least he's speaking his mind, and at least it's something refreshing. And so this is Limbaugh's take on it. And the last thing I'll add is that Trump also has the courage to question ISIL or ISIS. And he's repeatedly told various news outlets, who is ISIL? Who is ISIS? Which is kind of an oblique way of saying, could ISIS be a CIA or Mossad or MI6 creation? And Putin's really showing that the emperor in the US has no clothes here by easily taking out ISIS, whereas we claim ISIS is elusive and there's nothing we can do about it, and we keep failing. And apparently Trump is hinting that the failure of the U.S. to do anything about ISIS is precisely because they're a backdoor asset of the U.S. and not really the enemy of the U.S. See, so Trump is pushing a lot of buttons. So you may like it, you may not, but it's creating a stir here. It's making for an interesting campaign.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now, we'll move along. This morning, of course, today's Wednesday, so that meant that at midday, Prime Minister's questions took place. And this morning, the House of Commons tweeted out this image, which I have to say I found quite distasteful.
And interesting.
Very interesting, very interesting. So the faceless Cameron and the faceless Corbyn, who seems to be sort of pushing Cameron forward there. This is the image that the House of Commons wants to represent the politicians as.
I think there's a distinct message here, Mike, and I think the message is that personalities don't matter. It's moving forward together was what it point. This is saying that actually both these people are on the same side. There's the hand extended from Corbyn, lifting up Cameron's elbow. What's the single finger? One purpose, the common purpose?
The common purpose, yeah.
But you might like to comment on that if you can see it clearly, Mark. It's just a fascinating piece of artwork, and obviously it's been done for a reason.
Never having seen this before, I don't have anything sterling to say about it, except that I concur with your observation, Brian, that it suggests the faceless state, the faceless bureaucrat. It suggests kind of a lack of soul and a kind of hard-edged march forward, with partnerships that are automatic and really just kind of the faceless state without a soul will do what it will, and personalities and humanity don't really matter. It has sort of a dehumanizing effect. That's my initial take. There could be other interpretations.
I think I agree with that. But if anybody has any further comments they'd like to make about it, please get in touch with us, because I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, well, that brings us nicely into what does appear on television, and we're going to come on to the subject of the BBC. So let's bring in this UK column article going back to July 2014, talking about the BBC charity Media Action and the article Subversion from Broadcasting House to Kazakhstan. Now, we're going to bring this up in front of people again because we're seeing some very, very dirty, devious stuff going on from the BBC, which was all created around this article. So we've got BBC News, BBC Trending, and this is a very, very emotive story about a little boy who's dying, and he says basically, please don't bury me, to the doctors as they're trying to treat him. So the BBC gets up a warning, always good to make people look at it. This article contains a distressing image. The video shows 6-year-old Fareed Shawki pleading in a soft voice to doctors, "Don't bury me," as tears stream down his face. And then they have the image, so here it is. And this little boy later dies, according to the BBC. A few days later, he's died of his wounds, which I think were from shrapnel. And then the article produces this: confused about Yemen, want to know more, check out this interactive explainer. And you can link through to a couple of things. You get to this one, here we are, BBC trending, "My country's a mess and no one understands." They're not actually talking about UK here, this is talking about Yemen. And then in comes the good-looking lady, here she is. And this is the start of the most incredible interactive video, which I'd encourage all of our viewers and listeners to go and see, because it is disgustingly horrible, I think is my best description, in its childish cartoon presentation, but with virtually no factual information being presented as if it is all factual. So we just got a couple of stills from the video. So we have the lady who's put across as the intelligent one. She knows what she's talking about. The thug appears, and I am going to call him a thug, with his tattooed snake and bulging biceps and black shirt. He comes on and he says, "Well, I'm not thick, but no, I don't know about Yemen." And then you can work your way through this video, and at specific times, in amongst the dreadful cartoon presentation, you can click on yet more little BBC video clips to apparently learn what is really happening in Yemen. It is so outrageous, it's designed for very, very childish minds. BBC propaganda at its absolute worst, Mike.
Yeah.
Key to it is, of course, that the BBC goes back and it says, well, we had an Arab Spring, then we had trouble with an uprising against the president who'd been in post for 33 years in Yemen, and then we've ended up with a sort of civil war between one group and the Houthi, and they make great effort in getting you to pronounce this word properly. In the BBC video, they keep coming up with this word, going back, reinforcing it. What they never do is actually talk about Saudi Arabia attacking Yemen. This is another news clip where, if you go into this, the BBC is actually promoting the Saudi cause of military action against Yemen. So I'm just wondering whether the BBC video, interactive video on Yemen, had a little bit of money coming in from Saudi Arabia. Well, let's go to Media Action, because, of course, Media Action boasts of being independent of the BBC, but it says it's transforming lives through media around the world. Why am I bringing them up? Because this organisation has also been operating in Yemen. Let's have a look at what they've been doing. This is the start of big activity in 2011, when all the troubles were on, that BBC Media Action started to put drama out in Egypt. And it says social drama is highly influential in the Arab world. Research shows that Egyptians watch on average 4 hours a day of television, with drama at the centre of their viewing schedule. Importantly, Egyptians look to social drama for inspiration to resolve problems and dilemmas in their daily lives. They can also see things which are normally considered taboo. So here's the BBC doing its best to get into a society and imprint BBC values. And here they are, challenging attitudes and behaviour in the Arab world. If you're listening to us today and you are a member of the Arab world, well, then the BBC wants to change your attitudes and behaviours. And down at the bottom, we get it. The project was launched in 2009 in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria and Yemen to facilitate community-driven social responsibility. And we're going to say, who is the BBC to impart any kind of social responsibility? It's it's just in your face, Mike, what these people are pushing through.
Absolute propaganda arm of the Foreign Office.
Well, we'll go through this quickly. I know we're up on the stops for time, but if you go exploring BBC Media Action, you come up with this charity very quickly. Bright Future. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Let's have a look at the trustees. Well, we've got a Mr. Patel here. He's very big in all sorts of things, particularly banking industry. He's just been everywhere. There's the Windsor Leadership Trust that we mentioned earlier at the top of the list. And sorry, down at the bottom, it was saying that he was involved with BBC Media Action as well. So if I do this very, very quickly, they say they're independent. Where does the money come from? Well, overwhelmingly, you're talking British government, EU and UN money, including the US State Department there, top right, US aid. So this is not a charity. This is a globalist government front. And if we have a look at this, BBC Media Action is the BBC's international development charity. It's legally, financially, operationally independent of the BBC. And it says we're independent from the BBC and not funded by the licence fee. Well, no, but the BBC leeches off the licence fee. And then if we just look at this, they claim they're independent. What does it say here? They want to promote the purpose and work of BBC Media Action across the BBC to encourage collaboration. So they're independent but collaborating.
Yeah.
It's clear as mud. Then we've got BBC trustees embedded in BBC Media Action, so that's not independent. And then they don't feed off the BBC except where it's the pension pot. Some UK employees, this is Media Action, are members of the BBC pension schemes. And you can have a look at this. This is office facilities given by the BBC to Media Action, obviously has a value. This is an absolute lie that this is an independent charity. And yet, what are they doing? They're begging for money. Here's James Harding, Director of News and Current Affairs, BBC. And of course, what is he saying? The great things that the BBC does in the world. This is not independent.
No.
And we'll just leave you, if you feel concerned at this organisation or as concerned as we are, here's a couple of emails to get in contact with them to ask how they justify their existence. But this is propaganda getting into the Yemen, helping to break down society?
Yep.
I think so. Mark, I know that was a very rapid run through, but if you'd like a comment on that, please do.
Well, that was a very masterful job of showing that they're not independent. And in fact, BBC Media Action is a direct affiliate or arm of the BBC itself. That's very clear. And, you know, it even goes back to the war planners in the United States, quite a few years that television can be used as an instrument of psychological warfare. And this is clearly an example of that, to undermine the traditional values, to create political confusion in these Arab-based countries, largely Muslim, to undermine their cohesiveness. Warfare is not only fought with bombs and bullets.
Well, that's absolutely true. Go back to the Cold War days, and of course, many of the military publications were on that very subject.
Correct.
How to win a war without dropping a bomb or firing a bullet. But what we're looking at here with the BBC is blatant subversion to get in and destroy a country's culture, history, and community interaction. It could not be plainer. It's all being done with British taxpayers' money. Simply outrageous. Well, on that note, Mark, we'll thank you very much for joining us. We'll also say thank you to all our viewers and listeners for joining us. If you like what we do, please consider taking out a subscription or making a donation. With your help, we'd like to expand what we're doing to produce better coverage, more information, and more programs in the week. So there we are. That's it for today. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.